undivided Trinity.
Amen.
The story from Numbers that we just heard is bizarre. It's a story of snakes and venom, of poison that can and does kill. And when we meet the Israelites this morning, they have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Apparently, pillars of cloud and fire are not very good at navigating. So a journey that should have taken about 2 weeks instead has taken 40 years. And along the way, the people have complained a lot. They complained about being hungry and thirsty. True, Moses struck a rock and water came out, but they still complained. They complained about a lack of food, and God sent manna, and they complained about the manna. So God sent quail, but that didn't make them happy either. So they kept wandering, hungry, thirsty, lost, complaining about Moses' leadership. By this morning, though, God has led them right to the edge of the promised land, so close they can practically taste the milk and honey promised by God. And God has told them to enter that land, just sashay on in like they own the place. But with the exception of 2 courageous spies, the people are too scared to do so. They refuse to believe that the land is safe for them. They are afraid to enter a land they have somehow convinced themselves is inhabited by giants. And it is becoming clear at this point in the story that their continuing stint in the wilderness is their own fault. It is becoming clear that they do not trust the God who led them out of Egypt to the threshold of a new land. They cannot trust that the God who sustained them in the desert has brought them to a new beginning. And so rather than trust God to get them through this one last hurdle, they choose to stay put in the wilderness. And they begin to complain again with gusto. Some of their complaints are reruns of things they've been kvetching about for 40 years. Some don't quite make sense. We have no food. We hate the food we have. But then, not content to just complain about Moses and his lousy leadership, they start to complain about God. And God is not amused. God has faithfully stuck with the people for 40 years, feeding them, giving them water, protecting them from Pharaoh, having their back at every turn. But through it all, they still have not learned to trust God. And worse, they blame God for their predicament. So God stops protecting them. And suddenly the snakes, which you have to believe have been in the wilderness all along, see Genesis, suddenly start crawling out from under every rock and begin to bite and kill the people. Well, the people, understandably, freak out and quickly turn back to Moses. Moses, what can we do to get God to call the snakes off? Or, put another way, Moses, how do we escape the consequences of our choices? So Moses, as he has done many times, turns to God and prays that God spare the people. And God answers, but it is an answer so weird, so ungodlike, that we cannot help pay attention. Make a copper viper, put it on top of a pole, and have the people look up at it. If they look up at it, the bites they suffer will not kill them. I don't know, it seems to me God could have done something else, like send the snakes back under the rocks, make them non-venomous, take their fangs out, I don't know. But instead, God does something that makes the people trust in God again. They have to trust that looking at the pole, looking at an image of the thing that could kill them, will save them. It's no wonder that this story from Numbers gets little airtime. The truth is that we Christians would likely ignore it altogether if Jesus himself hadn't quoted it in the conversation he has with Nicodemus, the Pharisee who came to him by night. We would rather just not talk about things that scare or upset us. But Jesus has a persistent and annoying habit of going straight to those places in our minds and our lives. As Jesus chats with Nicodemus in this morning's gospel, we just heard the tail end of that conversation, he draws a parallel between the snake on a pole and the way that he too will be lifted up high on a cross for all the people to look at. Both the snake and Jesus reminders of God's saving actions. Now, at first glance, this parallel does not make a lot of sense, although with Jesus, that is par for the course. The snake is the very image of the thing that was killing the people Israel. The cross is a weapon of torture and death. But I have a suspicion that is exactly the point Jesus was making. Just as the snake on the staff showed the Israelites what was killing them, so too the cross shows us what is killing us. That is, the cross shows us ourselves. It shows us what we would do to another human being, what we would do to God in flesh, how far we are willing to wander from God's dream for us. The thread in these stories is that they remind us just how far we can get off track. And they remind us that while God's love and grace is bedrock, we have to be willing to look at our truths, those places in our lives we would prefer to hide from, those places we have wandered far from God's dream. We have to look there in order to receive grace and be healed. In order to be brought to life, we have to face the things that are killing us. And the biblical word for that is sin. We have to face our sin. Now, I know that is a wildly unpopular word in many Christian circles, and I am well aware of its grossly abused and abusive use in the church over the centuries. I do not believe that humans are created in sin, out of sin, or to sin. I believe we are created out of and for love, that our deepest identity is the original blessing of God, that we are blessed from God by the start. And yet, at the same time, we have a deeply ingrained penchant for turning away from God, for separating ourselves from God, for sinning. That is our truth as humans, and not calling it what it is, sinning, does not make it go away. In fact, it probably gives it more power. We have to look at the unjust, sinful systems in which we participate. Look at our own failings and shortcomings, those places where we know we are separated from God, in order to begin to heal. We must, for example, name and look at the sin of racial injustice to begin to dismantle it in our own lives and in our collective life. We must look at, name the sin of treating some of God's beloved as less than because of their non-binary gender identity or their sexual orientation, in order to have a prayer of overcoming it. We must look at and name the sins that cause us to hate whole groups of humans and decide they have no place in our society, or worse, in our churches. We must name and look at sins that burrow deep into our mind like worms, such as conspiracy theories that bend the truth. Sins that cause us to look at our planet, God's planet, as one big fat resource and abuse it. Now, I get it. Nobody wants to talk about sin, especially our own sins. I sure don't. But this is a surefire way to give them power over us, to allow them to take root deep within us and misshape us and everything we do. And as the Reverend Dr. Kristen Atkins Whitesides writes, quote, "While we are busy trying to convince ourselves and others that everything is fine, that we've moved past all that, as we try to explain away our sin or pretend we are not afraid, its poison is already at work, slowly leaching away everything that makes our lives beautiful or good," end quote. So these often overlooked, downright weird stories that we heard this morning force us to face what scares us most. They remind us that it is not until we are able to tell the truth, when we are able to be honest about our sin and our need for God, that the copper viper and the cross can move from symbols and signs of our own separation from God and brokenness to new signs of healing and hope. Because the truth in these stories is that when the Israelites looked at the viper on the pole, they saw not a snake that could kill them, but the God who heals and gives life. When we look at the cross, we see, yes, a horrific tool of torture, cruelty, and death. We see just how far our destructive impulses will go. And we see the face of Christ, who reminds us just how far God will go to reach us. We see the full extent of God's love for us. It is here, in this mix of separation, sin, and pain, promise, and love, that we begin to understand the depth, breadth, and power of God's love. We are reminded that God can take even the most lethal and deadly parts of our world, the most sinful and selfish parts of ourselves, and find ways to redeem them and remake them into instruments of healing and hope, if only we will let God in. We do not often like to talk about things that scare us, or about the things we suspect might be killing us. And yet, it is only when we are willing to look them full in the face, it is only when we are able to name the ways we have been poisoning ourselves, our relationships, and our world, that we can also fully recognize how much we need God to help us, redeem us, and save us. And when we come face to face with that kind of power, that kind of love, we are changed. So together, may we have the grace and the strength to look up and live. May it be so.